journalists in New York who, at that time, were foreign correspondents beginning to cover the World War II. And we have grown since then to more than 450 members. We have in recent years, we put a special emphasis on freelance journalists and the special needs that they have, particularly in conflict zones, and covering the news without a home office, without a fixer. We offer them training, we offer them other programs, including press accreditation. And we have a news service that you might take a look at. It's called OPC Connect, in which assignment editors and photojournalists and correspondents who are abroad can connect with each other for assignments, for resources, etc. One of our most important affiliations is with the OPC Foundation, which awards fellowships to aspiring foreign correspondents. My friend Bill Holstein here is the president of the OPC Foundation, and before I turn it over, I'd just like to note that any students who are in the room might like to know that the deadline for the Foundation Fellowship Program is December 1. So get your applications in if you're interested. So now, Bill Holstein, who is an author, covered Afghanistan in 1979, was there for the Soviet invasion, held under house arrest for some period of time. A couple of days.
It wasn't bad, it was in the Intercontinental.
Was there alcohol?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure, alcohol.
All right, so that's okay. And Bill now serves as president of the foundation. So I'll turn it over to Bill, our moderator tonight. And thank you once again for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for the license, if you haven't already. So Jerry thinks I'm an antique, so I'm only moderating, I'm not presenting, but I covered the Soviet invasions and I produced this clip. I dug it out of the ash heaps of my career from December 30th, 1979. This is from Shower. The Soviet Union is pouring more troops and weaponry into Afghanistan and will likely continue doing so until it controls the entire country. Diplomats and returning travelers said someday. So I was there when it was happening. So does that make me an antique in my opinion?
No, it makes you an old Afghan.
That's it. All right, great. So just for a show of hands, how many of you have been to Afghanistan? Oh, great. So my own travels and own travails of being put under house arrest and expelled are nothing compared to the people up here tonight. Kathy has had 17 operations, is going to have her 18th operation. That's why she's here. What a remarkable story that is. Both David and Jerry were held, and so 3 of our panelists tonight have made enormous personal sacrifices to cover the story, to be there, to tell the story, to get the ground truth. I thought we might start, for those of you who have not been there, just to paint a portrait of this country, and we're going to be very informal tonight. It's the size of Texas. Afghanistan is the size of Texas. And it sweeps from the north, with the Hindu Kush Mountains, all the way to the south, where you have desert-like conditions there, where Iran meets Pakistan meets Afghanistan down there near, what is that area down south called? What is that area? Baluchistan.
Pakistan.
Right. So, and it has a fantastic variety of ethnic groups. All right, Alan Frank didn't turn on this.
I do.
And it's from AT&T telling me I used all my data.
All right. So the Brits, God love them, they cut the Pashtun tribe in half. And so half of it went to the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, half is in Afghanistan. So this creates one of the fundamental problems that we're facing, is that this tribe has a language and a lore and rituals and beliefs. They think of themselves as the same tribe. Is that, Kat?
They do.
Hold your microphone up and talk.
Oh, sorry, they do.
So, I mean, are they a cohesive tribe? Do they really still feel that?
It's nothing cohesive about the questions.
Right.
Just kidding.
So they're subcontinental in nature. Then in the West, you have Iranian influence. They speak Persian, a dialect of Persian in the West.
Which in Afghanistan has the 2 languages, the Pashtun and Dari.
Dari is the Persian language.
Yeah.
And then in the north, you have Turkey and Mongol type influence pushing down Uzbekis, Tajiks. So it's a fantastically complex place. And so what other portrait would you want to paint of this country so it would help our guests understand it?
30 languages. One person in one village, in one valley will not be able to understand the dialect of a person in another valley. It has tremendous amount of water, which makes it very seductive to its neighbors. It prides itself on having defeated the Soviet Union, but it is not a nation that has never been conquered. Genghis Khan crossed over in the 13th century and laid waste to the country. After that, Babur, after that, Tamerlane and Babur founded the Mughal Empire in India. Alexander the Great was smarter in a way. He married a woman named Roxanne in Balkh in the north, which enabled him to cross into India, but he lost most of his army on the way back to Balochistan. So it has this long, long tradition of being able to, in its mind, withstand invaders and also to say that we were never colonized. And this gives them a tremendous amount of strength. Now, one can argue about that because the British fought 2 wars there. And when I was, I don't know what Kathy would say or what David, but in my experience, my jailer said, the British are back for revenge. Pashtun mothers today say, be good or the British will come and get you.
Someone told you, we threw your uncle out. Someone's in your book. So
that's right.
I think also one thing to know about Afghanistan and Afghans particularly is the Afghan people have, for at least in recent history, the last 3-4 decades, always been caught in the middle of conflicts between either the Russians invading and then the warlords or the then the U.S.-led coalition and
the Northern
Alliance. And the Afghans as a people, although very, as Jerry said, speaking many languages and different ethnicities, Afghans as a people are tremendously hospitable. Despite what everybody says about them not liking foreigners, they actually quite love foreigners, and they were ecstatic to have, after the collapse of the Taliban, they were ecstatic to have the presence of foreign troops in Afghanistan. What they didn't want was for the foreigners to put in back in power those who had last been in power and done such a tremendous amount of damage and went after people. And so I think, as well as the complexity of the people, I think one thing for people to know about Afghans is their tremendous resilience and tremendous hospitality towards others, and which is, I think, one of the reasons that people tend to keep coming back and back.
David, while we're just drawing this mental picture of Afghanistan, what else would you add that is salient or is important?
Just that, as Kathy said, there's this contradiction because on an individual level, Afghans are incredibly warm and loyal and brave and have this tremendous sense of honor. Right now, I think the country is deeply divided in terms of urban areas, major cities that are very proud of many of the changes that have happened since 2001, and it's very different in rural areas. So that's a core tension in Afghanistan, and I would just reinforce, Afghans are warlike and they'll fight forever. The only reason they've been able to fight is because, as Kathy said, Afghanistan has been a location of endless proxy wars between outside powers. We sent in all the weapons that defeated the Soviets. Pakistan has been back in the Taliban, as I'm sure we'll talk about. So these wars couldn't have gone on and on for so long if there weren't foreign powers constantly funding in weapons and money and using the Afghans as their proxies.
Where were you when you were in captivity, when you were held? What area of Afghanistan?
In the same as Jerry, in the tribal areas of Pakistan. Waziristan, north and south. Waziristan, which was close to the border area where Kathy was attacked.
This is an area that never accepted any outside rule of any sort. And there's a north Waziri accent and a south Waziri accent, and you get caught in the wrong place with the wrong accent, you're in trouble. So let's dig into
Wrong passport.
Wrong passport, wrong color, wrong colored hair. So let's dig in. So now the Americans, this is America's longest war. We went in 2001 after the Twin Towers fell. I was here that day. So we had confusion about what we really were doing. Were we trying to get Bin Laden, or were we trying to build a nation, a cohesive nation? What were we trying to do? So here we are, all these years later, and Obama had 100,000 troops in at one point, announced that he was withdrawing most of them, which obviously telegraphed to everybody on the ground that just wait. So now we have a new president. How many troops now do we have? 12 or 14,000?
13,500 total NATO and American troops.
And now we announced that we're going to raise it to 18,000 or so?
Yeah, something like that. I don't think they ever came out with the numbers yet.
It's secret, we don't say.
Yeah, it's
anything.
secret.
Right.
You'll
It's a
see.
secret strategy.
As your president says, you'll see.
So let's ask ourselves now, what, Kathy, I'll ask you. So is there a coherent government that controls all the country? Is there a coherent security force that controls all the country, or is the country balkanized in some respect?
It's a complicated question, and let's just say from the very beginning, there was no strategy for Afghanistan from the very outset, other than when the invasion took place on October 7th, 2001, was to get rid of the Taliban. Beyond that, there was no strategy for
Was it against the Taliban, or was it against Bin Laden?
No, it was against the Taliban because if you recall, prior to the invasion, the U.S. government had given Mullah Omar several options to hand over Osama.
Omar at that point was who?
Mullah Omar, and he was running the country. And he was actually given several options, and he was to hand over.
I'm sorry, so at that point, the Taliban controlled the country.
The Taliban were the government from 1996 to 2001. They were the government in Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance, which were brought in by the US-led coalition, had a very small area of the territory in one province of Takhar. They ran their operation from Tajikistan mostly. So the Taliban really ran the entire country at that point with a heavy hand and very repressive, no question. Certainly their punishments that people were abhorred by are the same punishments carried out in Saudi Arabia and in the same method and fashion. But in 2001, when after the 9/11, Mullah Omar was given an option: hand over Osama, close down the training camps, and a couple of other things. He said, listen, we'll hand over Osama to a Muslim country, prove to us where he actually did this. And of course, there was no middle ground, of course. There was never going to be, and because the Taliban weren't ready, nor was the US government. I mean, there was just no middle ground that was ever going to happen. But anyway, when the invasion occurred, there was no strategy for Afghanistan. Rumsfeld was very clear at one point, they are not nation building. He said there will be no nation building. I talked to US people at the embassy, I talked to them in Kandahar, the generals, American generals in January 2002. They knew nothing about Afghanistan, and they said that. They said, we're completely blindsided here. We don't know anything. The planning was already underway for Iraq. So I think the thing going into Afghanistan from the very beginning, there wasn't a strategy other than get rid of the Taliban. And I'm not so sure that the next step was and get Osama bin Laden, although of course Osama bin Laden was obviously a target, there's no question. But I think from the very outset, there wasn't a clear strategy and a clear way of getting to a position. And I think you're seeing the results of it 17 years on, as well as the results of the Bonn Agreement, which sort of built up.
So let me turn to Jerry. So Jerry, the ISI, the Pakistan intelligence, which has a number of the Pushtun people in it, and has been involved in Afghanistan, trying to maintain the idea that Pakistan could one day be a power broker inside Afghanistan. And then there's this Haqqani network, which you write about exhaustively in your book. And there's the Taliban, there's Al-Qaeda. Can you analyze the power structure for us? I mean, is ISI, the Taliban, Haqqani network, I mean, are they all part of the same axis of power, but just slightly shifting mosaics, or who is the enemy?
Well, I think loosely defined, they are allies, without a doubt. I think the Haqqanis clearly have their own ambitions. In some ways, it's a class war.
Within this group of people, it's a class war.
Oh, 100% it's a class war. But go back just a bit. I want to say one thing, is that there's an old Afghan saying, which former Mujahideen leader who became the spokesman here, we used to see him on television in the 1980s here all the time, and later became the ambassador here. And I went back to 2002 when I was there. I went to see him, and he was then Minister of Communications, and he said, remember the old Afghan adage. It's very, very important for you Westerners to remember this. Afghanistan is very easy to enter, but it's very hard to leave. The United States also brought, oilmen in particular, brought the Taliban to Houston before 2001 because we were interested, perhaps still are, in bringing a pipeline down because of the tremendous amount of oil and natural gas that exists in former Soviet Central Asia, which is Sunni, it's not Shia. It's like the difference between Catholics and Protestants, which plays a very important role, and which is one reason why Pakistan, in my estimation, in my studies, wants to and has consistently backed since its founding in 1947, when they used the grandfathers of the Mujahideen to attack Kashmir for them, the very beginning when they were to fight with India over whether Kashmir was going to be part of Pakistan or India. The Mujahideen, during the time when Bill was there and I was there, living with the Haqqanis, who were then our close allies, who said to me only a few months ago when I saw them again, we haven't changed, only you have changed.
So there's a Shia Sunni fault line running through Afghanistan?
There is very definitely a fault line, but there's not so much antagonism between the two in Afghanistan. When I was there in the early part, and then I was there in the 1970s, there was really no distinction between the two. Afghanistan was very tolerant. To go back to your part, the Islam of that time was very, very tolerant. And it was in 1973 when there was a palace coup between two cousins. The cousin and the brother-in-law of the king overthrew the king. He established a republic. He was called a leftist. He was called the Red Prince because he went to Kennedy initially for money when he was prime minister. Now he's president. And because we said no, he went to the Soviet Union, started to draw closer to them. A number of men, young men like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and another man named Shah Massoud in the 1970s, fled to Pakistan, where in 1973 they were taken in by the ISI. And I talked to the general who was in charge of this, Mehdi Nasrallah, and he said, I put them into training camps in the military, I gave them passports, and then I went to the US Embassy and asked for money. Now, there's no indication, I've never been able to find any yet, that we began to give them money in 1973. But if you read Robert Gates' book, In From the Shadows, former head of the CIA, former Secretary of Defense, he likes Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was President Carter's national security advisor, both admit publicly that we began to fund the Mujahideen in 1979 in July to pay them to draw the Soviet Union into Afghanistan, to pay them back for supporting our enemy here in Vietnam. We just saw Ken Burns, so we know somehow that.
So David, in view of this complexity, do you feel, I'm not trying to bait you, ask you a judgmental question, but do you feel like of course I am. Do you feel like American policy now going in is cognizant of the ethnic, linguistic, historical complexities? Does it seem to you that this strategy is what are the odds of this working as currently configured?
I feel intimidated on this panel, first of all. I mean, in terms of the quick answer on the U.S. policies, I think it's more that the policy does not pay attention to the regional complexities and the regional dynamics. And the only time that got close to that, and this is dealing with Pakistan's support for the Taliban, was potentially, Richard Holbrooke's brief effort at some sort of regional solution. And I'll talk about this later. I talked to a friend of mine who's in the U.S. briefly, but he talked about actually how popular Donald Trump is in Kabul. That there is a sense of sort of renewed confidence in the government because there is some increase in terms of the American troop levels. And what's very popular among pro-government Afghans is, his criticism of Pakistan. But I don't hear any follow-through from the Trump administration. They haven't named many senior diplomats in the region to actually somehow engage with this regional dynamic that continues this war going on and on, which is simply put, and this is very intimidating here, particularly with Kathy, but that Pakistan saw the Karzai government and sees the current Ghani government as allied with India. So Pakistan continues to back the Taliban. They want a friendly, pro-Pakistan government in Kabul. They feel they are being surrounded by India. This is a logical thing they are doing. It is what the Pakistani military feels is the existential threat to Pakistan, and that is India. And so what's the turmoil in Afghanistan? There's many, many causes, but a primary one is the continued tensions between India and Pakistan.
And so we have Iran and Russia now are back intervening. I assume the Iranians are intervening, supporting in the West, in Iraq, in that area.
They are supporting the Taliban, with
which
which they almost went to war against in 1998 because the Taliban are against ISIS and they are afraid of ISIS reasserting themselves. A member of an Afghan who's in the diplomatic service came and we had this discussion just yesterday about this, and they are afraid of, the Iranians are afraid of ISIS moving into Central Asia. And so this is one reason why he said the Iranians are backing the Taliban. And when I was there, they would talk about, would talk about whether they were telling the truth or not. It's difficult to know, receiving weapons from the Iranians. Secondly, there are members of the parliament in Kabul today who have Soviet passports and who there's one in particular who has an apartment in Moscow. And one thing that men have said to me there, and this has gone completely under the radar of the military, and as near as I can tell, the entire diplomatic community, and therefore the media, is that the war between communism and Islam, if you will, between traditionalism and communism, which would be a form of equality in a very feudal country, is going on as intensely, but certainly not militarily, under the table, under the ground, if you will, throughout Afghanistan today. So that very much plays a part in the society that we in the West are not a part of or even aware of.
It seems to me that in retrospect that this was the first failed nation, and now we have more of them. We have Syria, Sudan, Libya, so many more, Yemen. We have Afghanistan was the first failed state, and in my lifetime at least. And so this pattern was replicated throughout what we at the time called the crescent of turmoil. So once this pattern starts of the ethnicities being torn apart and foreign players coming in and foreign resources in, can peace ever be reestablished? Kathy?
Well, first, if I could just say, I think the Iranians are playing both sides. They certainly are recruiting both Pakistanis and Afghans to fight in Syria. So that's well, the Afghans and Pakistanis both have their own brigades in Syria and are funded by Iran. The ISIS, as Jerry so rightly said, the big fear is Russia's fear of ISIS. And Russia has, in its bases in Central Asia, just earlier this year, heavily armed their bases in, I think, Kazakhstan. Because of the
Islamic State. I mean, this is Islamic State.
Of the Islamic State, that's Russia.
Isn't it getting beaten, Islamic State?
Well, I think what people are afraid of, and is that their ability to, as they get weaker in Syria, I mean, they develop some lays in Afghanistan. I think it's always difficult, and I think that what is often said way too prematurely is this one's defeated, that one's defeated, this is over, that's over. I think that there are battles that are lost. I don't think ISIS by any means is defeated. You see that increasingly the Uzbeks, the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, has moved in to solidify ISIS and to spread ISIS a little bit. ISIS in Afghanistan a little bit beyond the eastern portions of Afghanistan to the northern portions of Afghanistan. But again, and this is just speaks to what both David and Jerry said, was the regionalization and the different players that are at work in Afghanistan and the various reasons. And while Iran might be supporting the Taliban at this point, they certainly are also hedging their bets with this little army that they're setting up, the fathom brigade, which is the Afghans, and the Pakistani brigade, so that they have their own little militias almost in place should they need them against whether the Taliban or against Pakistan, because there's a relationship problem there. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that and every nation has their own agendas in Afghanistan, and it's getting more so. David is absolutely right in terms of Pakistan's agenda and Pakistan's fear. But then you have Russia, you have Iran, you have China. China has a very interesting relationship with the Taliban. After 2001, in 2005, 6, 7, 8, they were meeting with the former defense minister, Obaidullah, who was then arrested by Pakistan because he was thinking about coming up with a peace plan of his own. So it's a very, very complicated, and the danger always, to me, seems to be this desire to oversimplify a very complicated situation. And while you say that the people in Kabul, like Trump, I've been a lot in Kabul in the last few months, the people, the administration, yes, Ashraf Ghani's people, and the leadership of Abdullah, the unity government, which is not a unity government, which was the most foolish idea ever, was to put that government in place, which was a U.S. plan, but still. But the people themselves are so frustrated in Kabul, and people are leaving Kabul. People who never left Kabul before, they're terrified. The Shias are terrified. The mosques are half full, the Shia mosques now, because they're so afraid, and that's the Islamic State. They don't see, whether it's Trump, the United States, Canada, they don't see, most Afghans, whether in the city or in the countryside, see the foreigners as being part of the problem now. After 2001, there was a sense that the West could do anything, and the US was so strong. Now, in vast parts of Afghanistan, it's a real disappointment, a frustration. They really, the Afghans, I'm not talking about the administration, because you're absolutely right, the administration in Kabul is very pro Trump, and rightly so. That Trump has said that, the President has said, listen, we want to send more troops, we're not going to give up on you. So there is that within the administration, and understandably, but among Afghans, and I think this is where people sort of lose a little bit of sight of what are Afghans feeling and what are Afghans thinking about. And really, the vast majority of Afghans that I've spoken to and that I see in Kabul, outside of Kabul, I haven't done as much traveling outside of Kabul since getting shot, but there is such a frustration and a disappointment and a real belief, a lack of hope. And that's driving people who, I have friends who are not big people at all, very small, and have never sent their families away. They were there during the Mujahideen, they were there during the communists, they were there during the Taliban. They sent their families away because they're afraid. They don't know what to expect.
So, David, can you imagine any circumstances by which there could be a diplomatic resolution that forces could come together and create peace and allow the Americans to exit? What is the level of probability of that? I'm sorry, I'm asking you another tough question.
I was all ready to say, I agree with Kathy. and like drop the mic. I wrote a piece after, and I've not been in Afghanistan for years. What upset me about the Trump strategy was that it was not a solution. It's what's constantly driven the American approach to Afghanistan, and it's logical, is domestic American politics. So we rushed in with George W. Bush, we're going to take revenge for 9/11, we did it. He gets distracted by Iraq, and there's sort of no more attention paid to Afghanistan. Obama declares Afghanistan the good war. He goes in, we do the surge, but he announces a time limit on the surge because he doesn't want to upset his liberal base, and the Taliban just sort of wait him out. And now Trump, drops the mother of all bombs, and that's going to solve it. And the carnage, the number of Afghans that are dying these days, it's 5,000 to 6,000, I think, civilians a month.
Yeah, lots.
If you include, I think, soldiers.
The soldiers,
police.
yes, you. Yeah.
Last year, I believe, maybe 15 American soldiers died in Afghanistan, and I think at least 5,000 Afghan police and soldiers died.
Yeah.
So this is a holding pattern. This is not what Trump is doing, will not lead to a resolution, and more Afghans will just die. And Kabul will stand as long as we keep sending in money and special forces.
We've spent $1 trillion so far on Afghan.
Yes, but I mean, this is what's so complicated about this. I do, there's all these cliches you hear about. We fought 15 different wars over the course of 15 years or something like that. So I just, there's huge problems in the country. There's huge ethnic divisions. The regional partners are not.
Well, if Americans got smart, is there a way forward?
I think you either go all in, which we're not going to do, or you leave. And this kind of middle of the road thing is just costing Afghans their lives.
And American money. So on the phone one day, you said to me, you thought that if there could be a conference of all the participants, that it might be possible to chart a path toward peace.
Lord Curzon, who was the last British viceroy in India, called Afghanistan the cockpit of Asia. It remains so today. And during the 1980s, at the end when the Soviet Union pulled out, the only reason they were able to pull out, the only reason we were able to come to some sort of conclusion was because we have what's called the Geneva Accords. The Geneva Accords were in Geneva, and the United States was not in the room. Soviet Union and Pakistan were in the room. The Afghans were on the side. That's how that thing was decided. In Murray, which is a hill station north of Islamabad, the capital, we have won peace talks already. The Chinese were in the room. The Americans were not in the room. The Taliban were in the room, and the Afghans were in the room. The only way that this will ever be resolved is for all the nations there to come together and decide that they have to work out something. Because in my experience in the last couple of years, looking throughout the Middle East and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, is that there's really none of these groups that exist in a vacuum. States have their own reason for backing various groups. And I don't think that anything can be resolved until this war will never be won militarily. Never, never. The only way will be at the conference table, and that is to say that Afghanistan, by the way, is very happy that yes, that we are there, but we have also done something more than just be there. We have signed what's called BSA, a bilateral security arrangement with them, an agreement. And they're very conscious of that. We have an obligation now. We have a treaty obligation with them. So we're not going anywhere. We're not, it's going to be like South Korea, North Korea, no one knows what this is going to be. But in the center, the cockpit remains Afghanistan, and the United States with its ally to one degree or another, Pakistan, with Russia, with China, and Kathy can elaborate on this, but I was in Pakistan for a couple of months earlier this year, staying at one hotel, the only one the Taliban haven't hit, the Serena, and I swear there were far more Chinese than anybody else in that hotel.
That's everywhere.
It's almost become a colony of China.
But that's everywhere. Sri Lanka. I mean, they're all over.
So all of these nations, all of which have their own agendas, economically, militarily, and Pakistan, which, as David said correctly, is afraid of being surrounded by India. I learned not so long ago that the leader of the man who kidnapped me is now getting money from the Indians. So the Rod is fighting this underground war against the ISI along the Afghan-Pakistan Indian intelligence. So this is an extremely complex situation here. And for us to come in and think with guns blazing and we're going to clean it out like Old West, No, ma'am.
So I'll ask one last question and then we'll open to questions. There must be many. Is there a will among the Afghan people? Is there a locus of power, a center, a point at which they could come together and say, this is what we want, is that the Afghan people? And so then, really, I remember you saying a couple of years ago, you believe their sense of national identity has survived.
Yeah, I mean, first, for sure, the Afghan people know what they want, and had the Afghan people actually been involved, they probably wouldn't be where we are today. I mean, but I mean, how do you get the opinion of the Afghan people? But absolutely, the Afghan people have a desire for peace. I guess what I was going to say though is that one of the things is, in my mind, and this is just in my mind, is this good guy, bad guy, this enemy, that enemy, because you'll find in Afghanistan and in the Afghan context, there is not a good guy, bad guy, good, evil, are the Taliban horrible, isn't Pakistan terrible, isn't India good, isn't that bad, you'll find that they're all good and they're all bad. And they all have their own interests. Right. And if you go into it on a slate that says, okay, we accept that, we're not making judgments, good guy, bad guy, good, evil, women have to have that, let the Afghans decide all of that, and find a way, and as Jerry quite rightly said, and as David rightly said, is that, bringing all of the different forces together without the precondition of you're the bad guy, now you're the good guy, now I think we're going to go on your side because, okay, you're the government right now, but you're not the government. So you're, in my mind anyway, in terms of making progress, there has to be a movement away from that and bringing everybody onto the table and say, okay, if you can, lay out your cards. If you can get them to lay out your cards and then move from there. I'm not sure that that's possible. That was just
Jerry, David, any add?
I just say what's unusual about Afghanistan is I cover the war in Bosnia and the disintegration of Yugoslavia. There's no, the problem in Afghanistan isn't that they want to.
Which one of the Pulitzers are?
Yes.
And an OBC award.
Yeah, OBC.
More importantly, the OBC award. There's no one wants to break up Afghanistan, except the largest ethnic groups in the country, the Pashtuns and the Tajiks and the Hazaras are a much smaller third group, fight over who's going to run Afghanistan. They don't want to divide it up at all. It's very different. And like my guards, when I was kidnapped, they want to run Afghanistan. I was like, what if you let there be a little more liberal interpretation of Islam in the cities? And they were like, no, we have to call the shots. They actually believe that if there was anyone disobeying kind of their interpretation of Islam, that if they fail to stop it, this was one Taliban commander I met with, that like if one person in a village is sinning, God does not judge the village by what each individual's actions. If you fail to stop the one sinner, you and the entire village go to hell. There was no concept of individual judgment. And that's a very extreme interpretation that many Afghans don't share. So I agree. Again, it's this country of contradictions. It's tragic. And the last thing is, now that it's gone on so long, you talk about failed states and we sort of ignore all this and we only care when it's a terrorist threat to us. I've met a woman who was running, the Office of Women's Affairs in Helmand in southern Afghanistan years ago. And when you get in a position of power in Afghanistan, there is no election that's going to come around next time. There's no meritocracy. You have a duty to your family to sort of take everything you can when you can. When you grow up, yes, and your family, your clan, and your tribe. And then there is a deep sense of Afghan pride. But so when that kind of chaotic situation exists for generation after generation, they take what they can because they don't like to.
They've been at war for almost 40 years. So.
With the aid of foreign powers,
right.
They have been at war for more than 40 years.
Let's go Q&A.
So could we do it where Amy will take one microphone on that side, I'll take one here, who else can share?
So we want to be able to
because
capture
we
them.
want every person to have a mic for the purposes of the.
You can take mine.
Well, you two, why don't
Don't
Can
take
you pass that? Here, Amy, you take this one, and you guys share.
We'll see where the questions come. Here, we'll move
And
the
you
microphone.
point it out and we'll bring it to
Okay,
them.
I hear this gentleman has been trying to ask a question for some time. Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Mike again. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I was in Afghanistan a few times last year in 2010. And so I'm very curious about, for those of you who've been there since then, when I was there, I was mostly in the South, and there was this huge effort with provincial reconstruction teams, which were State Department and military together in places like Zabul and these forward operating bases, and they were trying to do things, but they were, very, very constrained. And the last time I was there, it was looking like a failure. And I'm curious what's happened since.
They were trying to build some democratic or?
They were trying to build government. They were trying to nation building. My understanding is they're completely gone. So I'm curious what the U.S. is actually doing. I mean, where are these troops? Are they just stuck maybe at the Kandahar Air Base and in Kabul?
So is there any nation building going on?
Well, this is you're talking about provincial reconstruction, the PRTs. The PRTs are all finished. I mean, they had limited time, and there were some very interesting things were done at village levels. Irrigation systems and road building but I think now what the emphasis of the U.S. troops, other than for special forces, which there are some, the U.S. troops and other NATO countries that are still involved, they're mostly focused on training. They have, I forget exactly what they're called, and I just did the story when I was there. When there was an attack in Kandahar. They have, in Kandahar, there's 6 nations represented, and the soldiers there are mostly training. I think they're training, advising, and something else, and then they assist when the Afghan army requests them to assist, and they have them in the south, they have them in the east, they have them in the north, and they have them in the west, and that's pretty much how they're divided up at this point. Whether it changes with more, but these, which you were talking about, PRTs, provincial reconstruction teams. My understanding is they're all done now. I mean, it was, and most of the forward operating bases, although I think Camp Chapman is still there, a lot of that is the intelligence gathering. Mostly those are used for, I think, regardless of what you might say.
In terms of nation building, India is doing more than anybody else. They have they're spending them very, very astutely along the border regions and other places where it's going to make a difference, where people realize it's coming from India. They're very successful. Pakistan is very angry.
How are they doing it? How?
Well, irrigation projects,
Road building,
irrigation projects, electrification, health clinics, things that the people want, schools, things that the people want.
Wow. Right here. Yes, please. Alan Frank first, and then you.
What effect is the new administration policy of assigning a lot of the military decisions to more field level commanders going to have, and what's the report card on the effect of the so-called mother of all bombs?
What?
mother of all bombs.
Yes. It dropped them once, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't exactly, it was a big deal. People don't really know at this point how many people were actually killed. It was supposed to be a show of strength. I think in Afghanistan, certainly, I was just there last month, in August. So, there is in a sense that certain mother of all bombs didn't change the course of anything. As far as I know, there has been quite a U.S. Involved operation against the Islamic State in the East, which is where that bomb was dropped, and they certainly have made some. They have had some successes for sure in some operations against some of the leadership of the Islamic State, and that has caused confusion within the Islamic State and some fighting apparently between the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan and Pakistani tribes people who are involved in the Islamic State. But the bomb itself, as far as I understand, and from what I could gather there, real effect.
Jerry, do you have anything else to
As far as I have heard, it was done for symbolic effect. more than anything else.
That's what I'm saying. What about the generals now making the calls instead of the officers?
The way I read that was that the gloves can now come off, which would give them more power to do whatever they want, which would mean to call in airstrikes easier to, and I think a very, very serious thing to discuss is not necessarily the military, but the degree to which, and David and I discussed this just the other night, the CIA will now be able to use its drones. The CIA is not accountable. One reason we've always had this problem between the FBI and the CIA is the FBI has to testify in court. The CIA doesn't have to do anything like that. So if the gloves come off and we start to use drones ever more particularly by the CIA, and I don't know what the conflict will be between the military and the CIA, it will drive far more people to the Taliban. Because every time you touch anybody's family, the only place they go, they want revenge more than anything else, and you go to the Taliban.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lily and I'm from ex-Yugoslavia, another unfortunate country.
Wow.
Every time someone says Balkanization, my heart cries because it's such a... but first I want to thank you for being here, for being alive and giving such a huge sacrifice in the name of journalism, which today is not that much respected. And I remember how frustrated I was by...
They don't respect it.
Sorry?
Just by some, they don't respect it. Some they don't
I remember how frustrated I was during the war in my country, where lots of people who didn't know anything about our history or our problems or lack of problems were discussing, even in serious newspapers. So I would like to ask all three of you, what is the most frustrating thing to you about how the media reports or not reports on Afghanistan war? Thank you.
David, you go first. Get the all the easy questions.
The most frustrating thing is that no one's there. Kathy's there. Most, major newspapers have scaled back their operations in Afghanistan. There's virtually no network coverage from there, and you can't understand the country or the region without being there. And that's part of a broader problem of like a crisis, which we've all talked about many times, the business model of journalism, in particular newspapers, collapsing. And, we can talk more about that and the positive things about the web and the not so positive things about the web, but that's the problem. No one's there.
So, New York Times, Rod Nordland's there. There's no American media, no established.
But we do, there are local journalists who do wonderful jobs too. So it's not just necessary that a Western base be there as well. But the interest in the media outlets. For me, the biggest frustration, if I can say, is that I find stories are based on a narrative that is outside of Afghanistan, that is in Washington or London. I want to say Ottawa because I'm Canadian, but that's not true. but a narrative that is outside of Afghanistan. And my biggest frustration is that there's not enough interest in, or enough maybe looking at the situation and writing stories on independent of the narrative coming out of Washington and what does Washington say, or London. Always Washington, of course, because the U.S. is the major power. So for me, the biggest frustration is stories that focus more on the audience, looking more toward the audience and the narrative outside of the country, and not just Afghanistan, Pakistan, even when I was in Lebanon or Central Asia. I think for me the frustration is when a greater emphasis is put on the audience rather than on the people that you're reporting on in the story there.
Right.
I don't know if I'm saying it properly.
Saying very well. Jerry?
America is separated from the world by two oceans, but so what if we have modern technology? We are still a very domestic-oriented nation. And the interest level in the United States has gone down considerably after we killed bin Laden. And so Afghanistan is far away, and I still feel it's very, very misunderstood. The thing that bothers me is I think executives, where I've spent a lot of time the last 15 years at CBS, were very conscious of Afghanistan, certainly knew what was going on, but I think what really drove the news in some cases was the economics of it, that there was no interest in the nation at large. And now, of course, with Trump sucking, as they use the word, so much energy out, that is what we're focusing on. The thing that does bother me is that we, as much as anything, is that we are so simplistic in our approach to another nation, and that they are Muslims and we are not, therefore. And I wish they are no different from us. They cry, they plead the same ways. The people are absolutely, in fact, I was talking with this Afghan diplomat the other day, and he was complaining that he wanted to get up, he didn't want to sleep in, and his wife was urging him, get out of bed, get out of bed, you have to go to this, you need to go to this class, you have to get ahead in your job. Well, how different is that from any family in America? So they are the same, but we paint them as being so alien to us, and I wish we could change that.
We have two more questions. One gentleman wearing.
This lady has raised her hand several times.
All right.
I think she should be acknowledged, but I would like to ask a question.
She does, okay.
Very kind of you. Thank you so much. I'm wondering about that, because there's an interesting analogy to what's happening here. I'm wondering about the progress of the proposed wall between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Is that actually under construction? And what is the politics and the point, I guess, to that wall, and how it relates to?
Yes, good question. Yes, there are posts going up. The actual fence, as such, you know, it's a very difficult. The whole border area, the Duran line. One of the things that I think is very fundamental to the whole Pakistan-Afghanistan is establishing the Duran line as the international border. Afghanistan is dead set that it will not accept that as the international border.
So this is the line that the British drew through.
The British drew that separates the two countries, basically, and that's where the border is supposedly going up. Now, I don't say this as a way to stop the infiltration back and forth, because Pakistan will let them cross. It doesn't matter whether you have a 10-foot fence, with lines all along. If the ISI wants them to cross over, they'll have a way to get over. But setting that border as the international border, Afghanistan refuses to accept the Duran line as the international border. Now, there are some in Afghanistan, including the former President Hamid Karzai, who sees the border actually at Attak, which is way into Pakistan, and even beyond, when he talks about where the real border for Afghanistan lies. I don't say that he holds that today, that he would try to take over the whole province of Pakistan. But it's very fundamental in my mind, and that doesn't mean it's right, that both countries say, okay, this is where the border is. If one country, for example, if the United States and Canada, if the US says, okay, that's the border, but we don't accept really that that's the border. Well, Canada is going to think, well, at what point are you going to come in and come all the way up to Northern Ontario? Which I realize it's very cold up there.
You didn't see the news today. We're building a wall on our northern border.
On the northern border. I thought we were doing that. Just kidding. But so borders, in terms of establishing, whether you agree or disagree, and I'm not saying whether I agree or not or disagree, but if Pakistan says, okay, Afghanistan doesn't accept this border, so how can we demilitarize, or vice versa? So it's a very big issue, the border.
So I stood there in the Khyber Pass looking at the people coming out and taking a helicopter and flying up and down the border. It's like West Virginia, where I was born. This terrain is far more difficult than any terrain along the U.S.-Mexican border. This is, in effect, you'd have to build a fence through some of the world's most difficult geography. I just don't think that it's possible to build a fence that would be an effective deterrent between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Jerry, a final comment.
I was talking to Prince Al-Turki, who was a former head of intelligence in Saudi Arabia 2 years ago in Riyadh, and he said, "Drawn line, think of the Rio Grande." And he's absolutely right. The Rio Grande divides what? It divides old Mexico. Afghanistan, the Duran line divides the largest ethnic group in the world without its own homeland, larger than the Kurds. the Pashtuns. There are more Pashtuns in Afghanistan and Pakistan. In Pakistan than in Afghanistan. The British were not stupid when they, for their own geopolitical reasons, divided this nation, thereby cutting through the heart of this ancient land. As the old Pashtun saying goes, I've been a Pashtun for 5,000 years, a Muslim for 1,500 years, a Pakistani for 50 years. So this is part of it. It is an unresolved conflict. Now, as Kathy said correctly, not one nation, not one legislature, not one government in Afghanistan has approved the border. Afghanistan voted against the entry of Pakistan to the United Nations in 1947 because of the border. There's not a Pashtun alive, in my view, who accepts the border. They cross back and forth. It's the most porous place in the world. So to them, the border doesn't exist. The border, as Kathy said, is the Attic. It's the Indus River, which is 80 miles inside of Pakistan, which of course Pakistan doesn't want. Pakistan wants that border, which is left by the British. So this is an unresolvable problem until such time as diplomacy is larger than nationhood or nation building, and I don't know how in the world that's going to be resolved, because we are far stronger than Mexico. There's no way that Mexico is going to reclaim Wyoming and Utah and that part that was once in Mexico. Afghanistan does not have the power. And Karzai, the only time I met him in 2007, December, we are too weak to get our territory where David was kidnapped, where I was kidnapped, and travelers in Pakistan back.
I promise the last question, this gentleman was wearing the Nuristani hat. So when I was in Afghanistan, I wore one of these, and my taxi driver had a beard, said to me, Nuristani, you're a Nuristani. This is from the province where the people who look just like him and I look, of European features. It's one of the most interesting to me. Where did they come from? Alexander the Great, or the Huns? We just don't know. Ask your question. We'll give you one answer.
Yes, my name is Bonnie Capelli. I'm a journalist with many years of experience in Afghanistan. I would like to ask a general but fundamental question of the whole.
Pick one of us, and we'll give you one of us.
Well, whoever comes first, Mr. Rhodes spoke of a holding pattern, and we are certainly faced with wars that never end. May I ask, is the fundamental possibility that there is a mental block in Washington, in the American media, in the American people, to avoid the question that the United States, the possibility or the fact that the United States did greatly enable the rise of Islamic extremism by its decades-long alliances with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, to refuse to examine this question, and if in fact it did, that it is a great task to confront these nations and have such a policy switch, so you just keep taking the can along the road. If I'm understood.
Right. David, another simple question for you.
In a word, yes. We should look more closely at our alliance with Saudi Arabia and our role in stoking Islamic fundamentalism in Afghanistan in the 80s. We were happy to have Islamic radicals kill Soviet soldiers. So I agree with you. I demand the microphone because I just want to say, I want to congratulate my friend Jerry on the extraordinary book he has written. Thank you. They're all sold out. He had the courage to go back to the region, to find out who betrayed him, to find out why he was kidnapped. He had the courage to explore the U.S. government's policy, how it failed to help families, how it failed the family of James Foley and failed James himself, how it failed the family of Stephen Sotloff and the Sotloff family and many others. And it looks very closely at American policy where European governments are paying millions of dollars in ransom, the U.S. refuses to do so, and Americans are dying at a much higher rate than European captives. So I'm sorry, Bill, I just wanted to praise Jerry and thank him for his work both on the region and the plight of captives. Many, many families, have thanked Jerry for doing this book and for speaking out about this issue, including the families of current hostages. Thank you, Jerry.
Jerry, several times in your book, you say, I wonder why I'm doing this. Do I have a death wish? Am I doing this to come as close as possible to death so that I feel alive? Yeah, there's a constant theme in your book about why am I here? Why am I taking these incredible risks? So what was your conclusion?
I won't answer that. I want to say one thing first, that yes, I was kidnapped. The next person after Daniel Pearl and the people who had me said, and there's a small group at CBS and a small group of Afghans and Pakistanis who risked everything to mount a rescue attempt. Without them, I wouldn't be here. And you pay a big price. You can divide a kidnapping into two parts. Everything that happens when you're inside, and everything that happens afterwards. And for Kathy, it's what she was like before, and then when she was wounded so bravely. And one of the most wonderful things, however, of surviving was the friendship I had with David, that we were able to, the two of us, form a bond. We could talk to one another. We couldn't talk to anyone else. And without that, it would have been very difficult to get through a lot of these very dark days since I was taken. And I think to work my way into your question is that I feel a tremendous obligation to those who did not survive. I feel a sense of a need to seeking a redemption, if you will, for all the trouble Dave and I talked about this, we put people through and all that has happened, in a way to try and resolve problems, make it better, so that there is not another. Peter Kasich, his father, told me just a couple of months ago, Jerry, if this book saves one person's life, it's worth everything in the world. And so there is that reason for why I wrote this book. Another reason, I don't know if Bill is referring to going up into the mountains and living in very recklessly as my editor at Public Affairs, a wonderful man who did so much for me, said it was because I had a contract and I felt an obligation because I knew people who are our enemies. And they asked me if I could go into the tribal areas and try to find those people and to find out what the CIA could not, the military could not, and that is what was really going on, what really happened to bin Laden. And there's also, without missing words, yes, a sense of romance and adventure, but all travel in the world, and everybody in this room knows that is divided. It's escape and pursuit in equal parts. So it was looking for adventure, but also ultimately it came down to be very, very straightforward here. In an interview that David Martin, venerable Pentagon correspondent, did with me before my story was aired on CBS 8 News, he said, "Why did you really go, Jerry? And why were you up in the mountains doing all that?" And I said, I think what it really comes down to fundamentally more than anything else, it's a father-son story. And my father was in the Marine Corps in World War II, and I had not done that. And just before I left to go to cross the border the last time, before I was kidnapped, I sent a note to my sister, and I said, I talked to her father, and he was then 95, and he's struggling with this or that, and she wrote back, she said, well, you know, that's why you're there. So, yes, that was one, and then David Martin, without saying he's a public person, but he said, yes, because my father was in the CIA, I had that same problem. So that was one reason, but I also felt I had an obligation. The reason I went back this time, as David said, was really quite complex, but I was forced to keep quiet, and I didn't know what had happened. And as a journalist, and secondly, as a human being, or as a human being and as a journalist, I wanted to know what really happened. I was a bit envious of David. He knew everything that happened. He was free when he came back because of his tremendous courage in escaping, to learn everything about his kidnapping. I didn't know anything. I asked the FBI, what was that drone doing overhead for a month? Was that there to look for the Taliban, or was that there because of me? He said we brought all assets into play. In 2012, I came home one night and there was a letter from the FBI. Dear Mr. Van Dyke, and this is a brief paraphrase. We regret to inform you that we have closed your case. Please do not be disturbed by this. We reserve the right to open it again, but your case is closed. And I looked at that and I said, they got away with it. The men who got me got away with it. The FBI doesn't know what happened. One problem with American policy is that the FBI, like American diplomats, in this case, the FBI, as fine as they are as individuals, will only go 90 days, 90-day rotation. When the British were there before, during the British Raj, they were there for 16 years. And one of the principal men involved in trying to resolve my kidnapping said to me, well, the Americans said this in Peshawar just 2 years ago. Americans are how should I say this? He's saying to himself, a special breed. Meaning that we did not have an understanding of Afghanistan or Pakistan in his view. It was an MI6 agent, according to the man at CBS who was in charge of the case, who got me out. It was he who said that we did everything to prevent Daniel Pearl. Daniel Pearl's father wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal in 2009. He said, I feel my son is striking big. It took me a long time, but I wrote him a letter and I wrote Mr. and Mrs. Pearl a letter and I said, I'm alive because of your son. Well, so I went back also to really look deeply into what really happened to Daniel Pearl, what was really behind it. It's another reason why I went. And it was also, his book was written for, as David so kindly said, for all of those who survived and for all of those who did not survive and for those in the future to protect them because it's a new form of warfare. It's the second. When Jim Foley was executed, it was the second most watched event and remembered in the United States. The first is since 9/11. We went to war because of a murder on television. One could argue that. So, there are a multitude of reasons, but
very, very moving. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we're going to be ready for a few more movies, right? Yes.